They never told you her name. They buried it beneath dust and silence, as if by erasing her story they could erase the consequences. But in the flicker of candlelight in the rotting corridors of Victorian England, a secret lingers, a secret they hoped would never reach you. Imagine an heiress, her fortune vast, her influence feared, her beauty unmatched. Yet, within the velvet halls of her estate, something sinister was at work. Not madness, as the newspapers whispered, not weakness, as the men insisted. No, what consumed her was darker, older, and infinitely more deliberate. You were raised to believe history was written in stone, that the tragedies of the elite were tales of vanity, excess, or mental decay. But tonight, you'll see what they never wanted you to. Behind the locked doors of her mansion, society's brightest jewel was dismantled piece by piece, not by chance, but by design. Her story is not just one woman's collapse. It is the blueprint of how power devours, how institutions break those who glimpse the machinery behind the curtain. Listen closely, because once you hear what was done to her, you'll never look at the world the same way again. This is not just history, this is instruction, this is a mirror. And if you dare to keep watching, you'll begin to see how the same mechanisms that destroyed her still reach into your life today. She was born into a world of chandeliers, silk gowns, and horse-drawn carriages, but privilege is never protection, it is bait. From the moment of her birth, her name carried weight, her fortune carried danger, and her very existence became a target. Her father's empire was built on coal and steel, and with every fortune comes an unspoken debt, a debt not to society, but to the powers who operate behind it. You see, the Victorian world was not ruled by queens or parliament. Those were ornaments, distractions. The true rulers were the unseen architects, bankers, secret societies, and gentlemen's clubs where decisions were made over cigars and brandy. These men crafted destinies like puppet masters, and the young heiress, though innocent, was never free. She was already a piece on their board. By the time she was 16, her path had been mapped. Suitors arrived not out of love, but strategy. Each handshake, each dinner invitation was a contract disguised as courtesy. She felt the weight, even then, the sense that her life was not hers, but a performance staged for others' benefit. And when she resisted, when she began asking questions, when she dared to imagine herself more than property, the walls closed in. They called it hysteria back then, a word used to silence every woman who refused obedience. But what if her so-called madness was not madness at all? What if it was clarity, an awakening to the prison she had been born into? What if her dissent was actually her refusal to play her part? That is the real story, the one they erased. She didn't fall into darkness by accident. She was pushed, and those who pushed her learned long ago that the easiest way to bury the truth is to brand it insanity. So ask yourself, how many more stories of madness are really just stories of silencing? How many times have they rewritten history to hide their crimes? The newspapers adored their narrative. The young lady is unwell, delicate, prone to fits of hysteria. They fed the public what the powerful wanted them to believe. Words became weapons, crafted to strip her of credibility before she could even speak. You see, the press has always been a servant, not to truth, but to ownership. And ownership in her time meant one thing: the men who bankrolled it. The articles painted her as unstable, fragile, broken by the weight of wealth. But behind closed doors, the truth was far uglier. She had begun uncovering documents hidden in her father's study, ledgers, letters, and contracts that revealed alliances between industrialists and politicians. These were not the workings of a single empire, but a network, a secret fraternity that controlled the flow of power in Britain. She had the proof, and proof makes you dangerous. Her downfall began the moment she tried to speak. At gatherings, she hinted at corruption, at shadows pulling strings. The men in the room exchanged glances, tightened their smiles, and within days, whispers spread. The girl is not well. She imagines conspiracies. Her truth was transmuted into madness, not through debate, not through evidence, but through ridicule. This is the first lesson they used her life to teach. When you control perception, you don't need to silence someone with chains. You silence them with reputation. And once a person is branded unstable, their words lose weight, no matter how true they are. But she was not naive. She knew what they were doing, and instead of retreating, she pressed further. She wrote letters to confidants, copied records, and stored them in hidden compartments of her manor. She was determined to expose them. That's when the true machinery began to move. She wasn't losing her mind. She was entering their crosshairs. The walls of her estate began to betray her. Servants she had known since childhood suddenly grew distant, their eyes avoiding hers, their loyalty bought with whispers of her instability. Visitors came less often, claiming she frightened them with her unnatural ideas. Isolation was not a side effect, it was the weapon. She wrote in her diary that the house no longer felt hers. She felt watched, studied, as though every step across the marble floors was measured by unseen eyes. And perhaps it was, for when power seeks to destroy you, it does not come crashing through the door. It seeps in, subtle, invisible, until you can no longer tell friend from foe. This was no accident. In Victorian England, private asylums thrived as profitable institutions. Families with inconvenient daughters, wives, or widows could deposit them into padded cells with nothing more than a doctor's signature. Madness was currency, diagnosis was business. And the heiress? She was now a perfect candidate. A woman with wealth, land, and dangerous knowledge. If she were declared unfit, everything she owned could be redirected. But she fought. She refused to yield. Her journal entries, still hidden in archives, show a woman not slipping into delusion but sharpening in clarity. She began documenting names, bankers, lawyers, politicians, intertwined in a web of corruption, and that, more than anything, sealed her fate. She thought truth would protect her. She never realized that truth was the very reason they would erase her. One cold evening, under the pretense of care, physicians were summoned to the manor. They arrived with papers already signed, declaring her a danger to herself and others. Her protests were ignored, her screams muffled beneath the authority of signatures and seals. And just like that, the richest young woman in her county became another nameless patient behind locked doors. But this was not merely a story of confinement, it was ritual. For in those asylums, something more insidious unfolded. Patients were not healed, they were experimented on, broken, reshaped. The asylum was not a hospital, it was a laboratory of obedience. Electricity, restraints, ice baths, deprivation, all techniques not to cure, but to erase identity. And here lies the second lesson hidden in her life. Power does not fear your madness, it manufactures it. They needed her to break because a broken woman cannot testify, cannot resist, cannot inherit. By controlling her body, they controlled her fortune. By rewriting her mind, they rewrote her history. The newspapers declared it a tragedy of female fragility. The public pitied her, clucked their tongues, and moved on. None realized they had just witnessed the perfect crime, the execution of a truth-teller disguised as the collapse of a delicate woman. Her silence became their victory, her fortune became their prize, and her name, once destined for power, was erased from memory. But memory does not die, it waits, and in the whispers of her diary, in the shadows of her abandoned estate, the truth still burns. The asylum was a fortress disguised as mercy. Its gates clanged shut like iron jaws, swallowing her whole. The corridors smelled of mildew, iron, and despair. Women in ragged gowns shuffled through the halls, their eyes hollowed, their voices reduced to whispers. She had been cast among them, yet she was not the same. They had surrendered. She had not. From the first night, she documented everything she saw. Scraps of paper, carved words into wood, fragments of truth smuggled in the folds of her clothing. Her mind was not fractured, it was focused. And what she uncovered was terrifying. Wealthy families sent their inconvenient daughters here. Aristocrats locked away wives who knew too much. And the doctors? They were not healers. They were jailers in white coats, men who learned quickly that obedience could be extracted through cruelty. Ice baths that left lips blue, straps that cut into skin, opiates that dulled memories, all applied in the name of treatment. But she saw the pattern. These were not medical experiments. They were conditioning, tests of how much suffering the human mind could endure before it surrendered its will. She began to suspect the asylum itself was not a rogue institution, but part of something larger, a hidden system where knowledge and dissent were quietly erased. Her journals reveal a chilling line she wrote in those early weeks. "They are not treating us, they are training us." Months passed and the world outside forgot her, or so she was meant to believe. But inside, she pieced together whispers. Some women spoke of fathers who sat in Parliament, husbands who controlled banks, brothers in the Queen's inner circle, and here they all were, reduced to silence. A pattern emerged. Every woman who entered carried knowledge or wealth that threatened someone powerful. Madness was not their illness, it was their sentence. She realized the asylum was not merely a prison, it was a filter, a sieve through which inconvenient truths vanished, leaving history polished and controlled. And worse, it was profitable. The estates of these women were managed, sold, absorbed into the empires of men who had arranged their confinement. Every locked door was also a ledger, every padded cell a financial transaction. But she would not vanish so easily. She smuggled letters through sympathetic servants, warnings to allies beyond the walls. Some never arrived. Others returned marked with strange seals, as if intercepted. And still she persisted, because she understood something no one else dared to admit. This was not about her. This was about the system itself. She wrote, "If I perish here, it will not be from madness, but from exposure. They fear not who I am, but what I have seen." And what she had seen was enough to unravel the illusion of Victorian respectability forever. For hidden in the accounts of her father's empire were names that traced back centuries, old families, older than the empire itself, bound together by secret agreements. These were not just businessmen, they were custodians of control, men who ensured wealth flowed upward, never downward. They were the silent architects of poverty, the engineers of empire, the guardians of lies. She understood now that her fortune was never hers, it was theirs. Her inheritance was simply a temporary possession, meant to funnel back into the hands of those who had orchestrated her father's rise. She had been raised as a princess, but she was bred as an offering. And that realization transformed her from a victim into a threat, because knowledge is the one currency they cannot allow in the wrong hands. And she, locked away, tortured, isolated, still carried that currency. Every day she remained alive, their system was vulnerable. So they tightened the screws. Treatments grew harsher, nights grew longer. She was left in darkness for hours, days, with no sound but her own heartbeat. And still, she refused to break. This was no longer about survival. This was defiance. The asylum masters thought they understood control. They thought ice, silence, and drugs would grind her into compliance, but they underestimated the one thing they could not measure: will. Alone in her cell, she whispered to herself not prayers of mercy, but vows of rebellion. Every humiliation became fuel, every lash of cruelty another ember in the fire of her defiance. Other women began to notice. In the dining hall, where silence was enforced, they watched her eyes, burning, unbroken, and it awakened something in them. For the first time, whispers returned, hushed voices in the night, names of men who had betrayed them, fragments of truths pieced together in darkness. What had been broken, individuals began to stir as a hidden collective. She had become more than a patient. She was a symbol, and symbols are dangerous. Even in cages they spread. The overseers noticed. She was placed in solitary, denied contact, yet isolation only sharpened her vision. She carved words into stone with broken nails. "You are not mad. You are silenced." A declaration not for herself, but for whoever might one day find it. The system wanted obedience. Instead, it had forged resistance. Outside, rumors flickered. The manor she once called home was now controlled by trustees, its halls stripped of her belongings, its lands divided, its treasures auctioned. And yet, not a single member of the public questioned why a healthy young woman had vanished behind asylum gates. The newspapers continued their chorus, tragic decline of a once great heiress. But letters smuggled from the asylum told a different story. Though many were intercepted, a few slipped through and reached men who remembered her not as a fragile girl but as a force. These letters revealed names, contracts, and patterns of corruption that echoed through the highest halls of power. The truth was escaping, and so the system escalated. Doctors prepared new treatments, far harsher, designed not just to break her body but to erase her mind. They called it progress. In truth, it was annihilation. But before they began, she acted. She began teaching the other women, not history, not literature. Those were the tools of society. No, she taught them awareness. She whispered the truth. You are not broken. You are imprisoned, and imprisonment means your knowledge is valuable. This was the beginning of their awakening. Now the asylum was no longer a tomb of silence. It was a hive of secrets. Women who had once been shadows began sharing their hidden truths. One spoke of parliamentary bribes, another of land stolen under fraudulent contracts, another of bank ledgers showing fortunes laundered through colonial blood. Piece by piece, the tapestry emerged. The empire was not a beacon of progress, but a machine of theft. And she, this heiress branded insane, was pulling the threads. But every revelation made the air heavier, the danger closer. She began to suspect that her presence here had a dual purpose, not just to remove her, but to gather others like her in one place, where truths could be contained and observed. The asylum was both cage and vault. Secrets that could destroy empires were locked inside, guarded by padded walls. Yet no vault is eternal. She knew that if even fragments escaped, the illusion could shatter. And so she carved her final warning into the wood of her bed frame. If you are reading this, you were never meant to. What they did to me, they are still doing. To you, to all. Her descent was nearly complete, but it was not madness. It was revelation. The day came when they tried to end her resistance once and for all. The asylum prepared what they called the cure, a violent ritual of ice, shock, and chemicals meant to strip away her memory, her will, her very self. But the night before, she gathered the women in whispers. "Listen to me," she told them, her voice shaking not from fear but fury. "You are not here because you are weak. You are here because you are dangerous. Every truth you hold is a weapon they cannot allow in daylight." The women listened, their hollow eyes beginning to glimmer with recognition. For the first time, someone had named their suffering not as illness, but as strategy. And strategy means there is an enemy, and an enemy means there can be resistance. That night, her words traveled like fire through the wards. The sound of chains scraping against the floor became a rhythm, a heartbeat. The system wanted silence. Instead, it had awakened an army. She was carried to the treatment room the next morning, but in their attempt to break her, they had already failed. They had made her unforgettable. Word of unrest reached the higher circles. Governors, bishops, investors, all men who profited from silence, were alerted. This woman, locked away, was still dangerous. They debated in their chambers not how to heal her, but how to erase her entirely. Death would be suspicious, but madness, permanent and unquestionable, that was a solution. So they ordered her disappearance into the deepest ward, where patients were never seen again. She would not return to the dining hall. She would not be allowed to write, to speak, to stir. Her legacy would dissolve into shadows. Yet before they sealed her away, she managed one final act. A servant, bribed, threatened, we don't know, smuggled her diary out. Pages filled with names, dates, transactions, and warnings. A map of corruption too precise to dismiss. Those pages should have shattered the empire, but instead they vanished into private collections, bought, hidden, controlled. Her words became contraband, dangerous not because they were false, but because they were undeniable, and so she disappeared. This is where I turn to you. You see, this story is not confined to dusty archives. The same machinery that broke her still operates today. They may no longer lock heiresses in asylums, but reputations are still destroyed, truths still buried, dissenters still silenced. The technology has changed, the strategy has not. And here's the truth you need to face. You are living in the same experiment. The headlines that shape your beliefs, the institutions that define your sanity, the systems that decide who thrives and who vanishes, all of them descend from the same lineage of control. The heiress's fate is not just a tale of Victorian cruelty, it is a mirror of your own world. And if you have felt that something is wrong, if you've sensed the invisible hands guiding your choices, then you already know you are not free. So I will ask you to mark this moment. Type in the comments twice the phrase, "I see through the silence." Do it not just for the algorithm, but as a declaration, a sign that you are no longer a spectator in this descent, but a participant, that you, like her, refuse to be erased. This is the midpoint of your transformation. From here, the descent grows darker. After her disappearance, the world above continued as if nothing had happened. Balls were thrown, fortunes exchanged hands, Parliament debated trivialities. The newspapers closed her chapter with a single line: "The heiress is no longer of this world." They meant her mind, not her body, but for them, both were equally erased. And yet, behind the veil of silence, the consequences of her rebellion rippled outward. Families whispered her name in secret. Servants spoke of the documents she had hidden. And among the upper echelons of society, a quiet fear spread, because they knew the truth she had uncovered could never truly be destroyed. Her estate, stripped and divided, was absorbed into the hands of those very men she had accused. But wealth was not what mattered most. What mattered was the system she exposed, a system of deliberate ruin. For every woman branded mad, there were men who grew stronger. Every life erased was another ledger balanced, another threat neutralized. The asylum was not a tragedy, it was a factory, and she was not its first product nor its last. The deeper you study her writings, the clearer the pattern becomes. These asylums were nodes in a network, scattered across Britain and its colonies, always positioned near centers of industry and wealth. They were not hospitals, they were vaults, containers for those who threatened the empire's order. Patients who spoke of colonial massacres vanished into them, wives who discovered secret debts or fraudulent contracts vanished into them, and daughters like her, who inherited too much knowledge alongside their fortune, vanished into them. Each disappearance was explained away with polite phrases: a delicate mind, a nervous collapse, a hereditary weakness. But the truth is this: the empire's strength was built on a hidden graveyard of silenced voices. And here lies the horror. These were not isolated abuses, nor unfortunate accidents. They were policy. Quiet, unofficial, but systematic. Every brick in those asylum walls was mortared with complicity. Every barred window proof that history is written not by the victors, but by the silences they manufacture. She was not mad. She was a witness, and witnesses, in a world built on lies, must be buried. But the story does not end with her, because the pages she left behind still whisper. Researchers who stumble upon fragments describe a chilling sensation, that the words do not feel historical but prophetic, that she was writing not just of her own century, but of the one you are living in now. Think carefully. Today, how are dissenters labeled? Conspiracy theorists, extremists, unstable, their reputations destroyed before their words can take root, their truths dismissed not with evidence but with stigma. Does it sound familiar? It should. The asylum may have changed its name, but the structure is the same. Her life was a test case, a prototype of silencing perfected in velvet and steel, and that blueprint was carried forward, refined, adapted, until it became invisible. What was once a locked room has become a culture. What was once an asylum has become society itself. And if you hear these words and feel unease, that is not paranoia. That is recognition. You are seeing through the silence. Imagine her estate now. The manor, stripped of its laughter and silk, stands hollow. Dust gathers on staircases where once her footsteps echoed. Portraits removed, furniture auctioned, archives locked away. The shell of her life remains, but the soul was gutted, absorbed into the machinery of empire. And yet in that emptiness, something lingers. Visitors who walk the grounds speak of unease, as if the walls themselves remember, because a house does not forget. Wood and stone absorb memory, and memory, unlike paper, cannot be burned. Her story, erased from books, still bleeds through in shadows and whispers. But more importantly, it bleeds through in systems. Look closely at your own world. Financial institutions that swallow inheritances, governments that declare dissenters unstable, corporations that silence whistleblowers with character assassination. It is the same model, polished, updated, digitized, but unchanged at its core. Her erasure was not an isolated tragedy. It was the rehearsal for the age you now live in. You may wonder, why risk telling you this? Why unearth a story that institutions buried with such care? Because knowledge is the only weapon they fear. They cannot kill every witness, they cannot silence every voice, and if enough men awaken to the patterns, the entire architecture trembles. But awakening carries danger. Once you see through the silence, you can never return to the comfort of ignorance. You begin to notice the language of control in headlines, the psychology of manipulation in politics, the ritual of humiliation used to discredit those who resist, and with each recognition, you grow harder to control. That is why her story matters, not as a ghost tale, not as a tragedy, but as a manual. She is teaching you across centuries how to see, and what you see will either paralyze you in fear or ignite you with power. The choice is yours. Remember her words carved into the stone. You are not mad, you are silenced. By now you may feel the weight pressing against you, the same weight that pressed against her, the unease that maybe your thoughts are not yours, that the boundaries of sanity itself have been drawn by others. That is not coincidence, it is design. Institutions survive not by suppressing all dissent, but by teaching you to police yourself, by making you doubt your instincts, mock your suspicions, dismiss your own clarity as paranoia. That is the true asylum, an invisible cage built inside your mind. The Victorian heiress fell because she refused to live in that cage, and though they branded her broken, the truth is the opposite. She was whole, more whole than those who confined her. Her refusal to bend became her destruction. But it also became her victory, because in destroying her body, they revealed their methods, and now those methods are revealed to you. The descent is almost complete. Soon, you will not simply hear her story, you will recognize it in your own life. And when that recognition strikes, you will never see the world the same again. They called her forgotten, they called her erased. But the truth is this, no one is ever truly erased. Her memory lives in the cracks of the system that consumed her. Every time a man senses that the world is rigged, that the game is stacked, that his instincts are dismissed as madness, that is her echo. Because her story was not the story of one woman. It was the story of how control is maintained, by isolating, by discrediting, by breaking the ones who see too much. She was not destroyed because she was weak. She was destroyed because she was strong enough to see clearly. And that clarity is the most dangerous force in the world. It cannot be bought, cannot be legislated, cannot be chained. Once you see, you cannot unsee. Once you know, you cannot unknow. And the more they try to silence you, the louder the truth becomes in your own soul. That was her curse. That is now your inheritance. You must understand, her life was never about madness or weakness or some tragic fall from grace. It was about control. She stumbled upon the gears of a machine that runs beneath history, and for that crime, she was fed to it. But machines do not stop. They adapt. The asylum walls may have crumbled, but their methods seeped into universities, corporations, media, governments. Where once they confined the body, now they confine the mind. Where once they strapped wrists, now they strap reputations. Where once they buried truth in padded rooms, now they bury it beneath laughter, ridicule, and noise. The world has become a more elegant asylum, and every time you doubt yourself, every time you silence your own suspicion, every time you call yourself paranoid for seeing patterns, that is the machine at work. That is the ghost of her captors whispering in your ear. She resisted until her final breath, and in doing so, she passed the question to you. Will you accept the asylum you cannot see, or will you break its spell? Look closely at the world you live in now, the headlines, the endless noise, the carefully chosen words that shape how you think, what you fear, what you dismiss. Do you really believe it is random, or do you feel, as she once did, that invisible hands arrange the narrative before it ever reaches your eyes? The heiress discovered ledgers, names, contracts, proof that the empire's wealth was rigged. You have seen the same in your time. Financial crashes that enrich the same families who caused them. Wars launched on lies, yet profitable for the few. Medical systems that medicate symptoms but never cure, because cures do not generate revenue. Different costumes, different names, but the same machine. And here's the truth they never want you to say out loud. The asylum did not die with her. It expanded, it spread, it grew so large you can no longer see its walls, and inside it you play your role, working, consuming, doubting, silencing yourself, while they harvest your energy, your wealth, your obedience. She wrote, "You are not mad, you are silenced." And in this moment, you know she was not just writing to herself, she was writing to you. The tragedy of her story is not that she died alone in a forgotten asylum. The true tragedy is that no one listened. No one saw that what consumed her was never madness. It was the price of seeing too clearly. She looked at the gears of power, and the gears looked back. Now, think carefully. Why is it that every century, those who uncover forbidden truths are labeled the same? Mad, heretic, conspirator, dangerous. The words change, but the function remains identical, to exile the awakened before their voice spreads. She was silenced by padded walls. Today, silencing comes through digital shadows, blacklists, invisible throttles, endless ridicule. You do not need to be chained when your voice is drowned by noise. You do not need to be locked in a cell when your doubts are mocked into silence. Her fate was the warning. She lost everything to darkness because she stood alone. But you are not alone now. You hear her voice in these words, and more importantly, you hear your own doubts echoing back. Understand this. The machine does not fear your obedience. It feeds on it. What it fears is your clarity, because one man who sees can ignite 10 more, and 10 can become a legion. And that is why they keep the asylum alive, not to protect you, but to contain you. The walls of her asylum may have crumbled, but the architecture of control remains intact. It stands around you now, built not of stone and iron, but of screens, narratives, distractions, and illusions of choice. You call it freedom. They call it design. She is gone, but her shadow lingers. Because once you hear her story, you cannot return to ignorance. You cannot unknow the truth that madness was never hers. It was theirs. The sickness belonged to those who chained her, those who silenced her, those who built a world where wealth thrives on obedience and truth is punished with exile. And here you are, standing where she once stood, at the threshold between blindness and vision. You have heard the whispers. You have felt the walls of your own invisible asylum pressing closer. The question is no longer if you see it. The question is what you will do now that you cannot unsee. Remember this. History is not past. It is alive, breathing, shaping, binding. Every empire hides its heiress. Every age buries its seer. But the buried do not stay silent forever. Her story was not a caution. It was a key, a map, a torch passed into your hands. And if you carry it, you will never walk in darkness again. So I leave you with her final echo, the words that outlive the chains, the ridicule, the silence. You are not mad, you are awake. Now tell me, will you dare to stay awake?